Chapter 19. The Treasure Cave. The sun had run about a third of his course, sending his warm and invigorating rays full on the rocks, which seemed almost insensible to their warmth. The monotonous and continuous chirp of thousands of grasshoppers invisible in the heath could be heard. The leaves of the myrtles and olive trees waved and shook in the wind, sending forth an almost metallic sound. With every step Edmund took on the warm granite, he sent scurrying away numerous lizards, bright as emeralds. In the distance, wild goats were to be seen, jumping from crag to crag. In a word, the island was inhabited and very much alive. Yet Dantes felt quite alone under God's blue sky. He felt an indescribable sensation, akin to fear, a distrust of daylight which, even in the desert, gives us the feeling that inquisitive eyes are following us. The feeling was so strong in him then that no sooner had he commenced his task than he stopped, laid down his pickaxe, picked up his gun, and, climbing to the top of the highest rock, gazed all around him. But he could see neither man nor ship, nothing but the blue sky overhead and the azure sea below. Reassured, he descended rapidly, but at the same time cautiously, fearing an accident similar to the one he had so cleverly simulated. As we have already said, Dantes traced the marks on the rocks back the other way and found that they led to a kind of small creek hidden away like the bath of a nymph.
Caught unknown just followed.
Welcome in. Thank you for the follow. As we have already said,
Hi.
Dantes. Hey, Carmelo. Welcome in. As we have already said, Dantes traced the marks on the rocks back the other way, and found that they led to a kind of small creek hidden away like the bath of a nymph of ancient days. The creek was wide enough at its mouth and deep enough in the center to allow a small ship to enter and lie concealed there. Then, as he followed the clue that had been so skillfully handled by Faria to guide him through the labyrinth of probabilities, he came to the conclusion that Cardinal Spada, in order to avoid being seen, must first have landed in this little creek, where he hid his small bark, followed the path indicated by the incisions, and finally buried his treasure at the extreme end. Hydrate before you dihydrate. Yes. Already on it. I could feel it. Good call, though. Hydrate indeed. This supposition had brought Dantes to the circular rock. There was only one thing that perplexed him and upset his whole theory. How could this rock, at least several tons in weight, have been hoisted onto its base without the employment of considerable force? Suddenly an idea occurred to Dantes. Instead of having been lifted, thought he, it has been lowered, and he jumped on to the rock to find its original resting place. He soon perceived that a slope had been formed. The rock had slid along until it stopped in its present position. Another medium-sized rock serving as a wedge. Stones and pebbles had been carefully placed to conceal every sign of an orifice. This piece of masonry had been covered with earth, grass, and moss, which had taken seed there. Myrtle and mastic bushes had taken root, and the old rock appeared fixed to the ground. Dantes raised the earth carefully, and detected, or thought he did, the whole of this ingenious artifice. But he reflected. The rock was too firmly wedged and too heavy for any one man to move.
Hi!
Hey, Ken, welcome in. You're lurking, huh? For those of you not familiar, Ken Arashi VT is part of Gen 2 of Underrealm, the VTuber group community that I, Ken, and numerous others are part of. 10 out of 10. Amazing variety streamer. You can catch him later this week doing his, I believe we called it a Megalodonathon. It was the name we came up with. We have not gotten the treasure just yet, Ghost River. But yeah, let's do a quick exclamation point. Underrealm. So if you're not already a part of our growing Discord community of 18 plus, like streamers, content creators, followers, and just if you're interested in streaming, we have a dedicated area for that. If you're not already part of our Discord, you could come check it out. It's really good. Yes, you're right on time, Ghost River. Suddenly, an idea occurred to Dantes. Instead of having been lifted, thought he, it has been lowered. Oh, I skipped back a bit. Whatever. And he jumped on to the rock to find its original resting place. He soon perceived that a slope had been formed. The rock had slid along until it stopped in its present position. Another medium-sized rock, serving as a wedge. Stones and pebbles had been carefully placed to conceal every sign of an orifice. This piece of masonry had been covered with earth, grass, and moss, which had taken seed there. Myrtle and mastic bushes had taken root, and the old rock appeared fixed to the ground. Dantes raised the earth carefully and detected, or thought he did, the whole of this ingenious artifice. But, he reflected, the rock was too firmly wedged and too heavy for any one man to move, were he Hercules himself. What means could he employ? He looked around for something, and his eye suddenly lighted upon the powder horn his friends had left him. He smiled. This infernal invention would serve his purpose. By means of his pickaxe, Dantes then cut an opening between the upper and the lower rocks and filled it with powder. Then he shredded his handkerchief, rubbed it in the powder, and thus had a match. Directly he had set a light to it, he withdrew. The explosion was instantaneous. The upper rock was lifted from its base by the terrific force, while the lower one was blown to pieces. Thousands of trembling insects scuttled away, and a long snake, the guardian of this mysterious cave, crawled away on its blue belly and disappeared. Dantes returned to the spot. The upper rock was hanging with scarcely any support over the cliff. The intrepid treasure hunter walked round it, chose the loosest spot, and inserting his lever into one of the crevices, like Sisyphus, he strained every muscle in his attack on the huge mass. The rock, already shaken by the explosion, tottered. Dantes redoubled his efforts. He looked like one of the Titans uprooting the mountains in their war against the father of the gods. At last, the rock yielded and rolled headlong into the sea. It had uncovered a circular place, revealing an iron ring set in the middle of a square-shaped flagstone. Dantes uttered a cry of joy and astonishment. Never had a first attempt been crowned with such splendid success. He would fain have continued his task, but his legs trembled so uncontrollably, his heart beat so violently, and his eyes became so dim that he was compelled to pause a while. He did not wait long, however. Passing his lever through the ring, he lifted with all his might. The flagstone yielded and revealed a kind of staircase which went deeper and deeper into an increasingly dark grotto. Dantes descended, murmuring the supreme word of human philosophy, perhaps. But instead of the darkness and the thick and mephitic air he had expected to find, he saw a soft and bluish light. The air and light filtered not only through the aperture just made, but also through some cracks in the rocks, which were invisible from without, while from the inside Dantes could see the blue of the sky. After having been for a few seconds in the cave, the atmosphere of which was warm rather than damp, fragrant rather than fetid, Dante's eyes, accustomed as they were to the dark, could penetrate into its furthermost corners. It was of granite, the facets of which sparkled like diamonds. Monoma, when you have a second, can you go ahead and get a shout out for Ken and one for Sino when you have a second? Honestly, the list is extensive. We've got Sino, we've got Ken, we've got Deus Kane, we've got Almontis VT. Just when you have a second, can you just shout out all of those amazing people and yourself? Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Monoma. Alas, said Dantes with a smile, these are no doubt the only treasures the cardinal has left. Suddenly he thought of the words of the will which he knew by heart in the farthest corner of the second cave. He had only gained admittance to the first cave, and must now find the entrance to the second one, which must naturally penetrate farther into the interior of the island. He examined the stones and sounded the wall where he supposed the opening would be, no doubt disguised for precaution's sake. The pickaxe resounded for an instant with a thick echo, which caused the perspiration to stand in great beads on Dante's forehead. But at length it appeared to the persevering miner that one portion of the granite wall gave forth a hollower and deeper sound. He scanned this part eagerly, and recognized with a perception that probably no one but a prisoner possesses, that there must be an opening there. He struck it again with more vigor. This time he noticed something peculiar. As he struck the wall, a sort of stucco fell to the ground, laying bare soft white stone. The opening in the rock had been closed with stones of a different kind. These had been covered with stucco, and on this the color and sparkle of the granite had been imitated. Let's see. Deus Almontis. Sino and yourself, please, Mono. Dante struck into the wall with the sharp end of his pick, which penetrated about an inch. Here, then, was the spot where he must dig. As yet he had had no food, but this was not the moment to eat. He swallowed a mouthful of rum and again attacked his work, somewhat strengthened. He took up his pickaxe, and after several strokes with it, he perceived that the stones were not cemented, but simply placed one on top of the other and covered with stucco. He pushed the point of his pick into one of the interstices. Interstice. Can I get an exclamation point word, Mono, when you have a second? A small opening or space between objects, especially adjacent objects or objects set closely together, as between cords in a rope or components of a multi-conductor electrical cable or between atoms in a crystal. An interval of time required by the Roman Catholic between the attainment of different degrees of an order, and by extension, an interval of time free to be spent on activities other than one's primary goal. Interstice. Interstice. Ah, fun word. Okay. It was sniped by my clutches. Good work, Valen. He pushed the point of his pick into one of the interstices. Interstices. Okay. Interstices. Just weird. He pushed the point of his pick into one of the interstices, pressed on the handle, and to his joy, one of the stones fell at his feet. The opening thus made was large enough to admit him, and so he was able to pass from the first grotto into the second. It was lower, darker, and more uncanny than the first. The air, which only entered by the aperture he had just made, had that fetid smell Dantes had expected to find in the first. He gave the exterior air time to replace this foul air, and then he entered. To the left of the aperture there was a dark and gloomy corner. As we have already mentioned, however, there was no darkness for the eyes of Dantes. He looked round the second grotto. Like the first one, it was empty. The treasure, if it existed, was buried in the dark corner yonder. Dante's hour of anguish had arrived. To dig through 2 feet of earth was all that remained to him between supreme joy and bottomless despair. He approached the corner, and, as though seized by a sudden resolution, set to work on the soil with all his might. At the 5th or 6th stroke it sounded as though the pickaxe had encountered some iron substance. Never did funeral knell or alarm bell produce such an effect on its hearer. Had Dantes found nothing, he could not have been more deadly pale. He plunged his pick into the earth a little to one side of this spot, and encountered resistance, but not the same sound. "It is a wooden chest bound with iron," he said. In a very short time he had cleared a space about 3 feet long and 2 wide, and by the light of the torch he had improvised, he recognized an oak chest bound with wrought iron. In the middle of the lid, on a silver plate which the earth had left untarnished, were engraved the arms of the Spada family, namely, a sword on an oval shield like that of the Italians, and surmounted by a cardinal's hat. Dantes easily recognized them. Pariah had drawn them for him time and again. There could now be no doubt that the treasure was there. No one would have taken such precautions for an empty chest. Edmund laid bare the chest in very little time, and saw appearing bit by bit the center lock placed between 2 padlocks and the handles at each end. all carved as things were carved at that period when art lent beauty to the basest of metals. Side note, the era in which this was written, like his description, Alexander Dumas's description here, it was a time when we would decorate things purely to make things more beautiful. And in a world of brutalism and like purely functional details, this is an art that I wish we would bring back. Like subtle curvatures. Like, I'm a huge Art Nouveau fan. And I like Art Deco too, but Art Nouveau is like if elves designed like details, and Art Deco is like if dwarves did. So like very square, very, repeating patterns, whereas Art Nouveau is more flowy and has a lot of leaves and flowers and curves like a woman. It's beautiful. Dantes took the chest by the handles and tried to lift it, but that was quite impossible. He tried to open it, it was locked. He inserted the sharp end of his pickaxe between the chest and the lid and burst it open. The chest was uncovered. The chest was divided into 3 compartments. In the first shone bright red gold crown pieces. In the second, unpolished ingots arranged in order, their only attraction being their weight and value. In the third compartment, which was but half full, Dantes took up whole handfuls of diamonds, pearls, and rubies, which, as they fell through his fingers in a sparkling cascade, gave forth the sound of hail beating against the window panes. After he had touched, fingered, buried his trembling hands in the gold and precious stones, Edmund rose and rushed through the caves like a man seized with a frenzy. He leapt on to a rock whence he could behold the sea. He was alone, quite alone with these incalculable, unheard of, fabulous riches, which all belonged to him. Was he awake, or was it all a dream? Could he possibly be face to face with reality? He wanted to see his gold, yet he felt he had not the strength to look at it. For a moment he pressed his head in his hands as though to prevent his senses from leaving him. Then he rushed wildly about the island, terrifying the wild goats and scaring the seagulls with his shouts and gesticulations. Finally he returned. Still, with doubt in his mind, rushed from the first grotto into the second, and found himself in the presence of his mine of gold and diamonds. This time he fell on his knees, murmuring a prayer that was intelligible to God only, intelligible to God alone. He soon became calmer and happier and began to believe in his good fortune. He began to count his treasures. There were 1,000 ingots of gold, each weighing 2 or 3 pounds. He piled up 25,000 gold crowns, each one of which he valued at 24 francs of the present currency, and which bore the effigy of Pope Alexander VI, or his predecessors. Yet this did not constitute 1/2 of the contents of the compartment. He measured out 10 handfuls of pearls, precious stones, and diamonds, many of which were mounted by the best goldsmiths of the period and were valuable on account of their remarkable workmanship, in addition to their intrinsic worth. This night was for Edmund one of those delicious yet terrible nights of which this man of astounding emotions had already spent 2 or 3 in his lifetime. We're on to chapter 20, The Stranger. Day broke. Dantes had long been waiting for it with wide open eyes. He rose with the first streak of daylight, climbed the highest peak of the island, as on the previous evening, and explored his surroundings. As on the previous evening, also, silence reigned supreme. Edmund descended, raised the stone, filled his pockets with precious stones, replaced the lid on the chest, covered it with earth which he carefully stamped down, and sprinkled some sand over it so as to make this spot look like the rest of the ground. Then he left the cave, replacing the stone after him, and effaced all traces of his steps for some distance round the grotto. He now longed with impatience for his companion's return, for in truth he could not waste his time in Monte Cristo looking at his gold and diamonds like a dragon guarding a useless treasure. Don't tell Deuce. He must return into the world and take the rank, influence, and power in society bestowed by riches only, the first and greatest force at man's disposal. The smugglers returned on the 6th day. Dantes recognized the Jeune Amélie from a distance and dragged himself to the port. When his comrades landed, he assured them that he was better, though still suffering, and listened to an account of their adventures. Side note, the Jeune Amélie is a smuggling vessel that he boarded when he escaped Chateau d'If as an escaped prisoner, but they do not know that he was, and he joined up their crew and sailed with them for quite some time. He displayed the most admirable self-possession. He did not even smile at the numeration of the gains he would have derived had he been able to leave the island. As the Jeune Amélie had only come to Monte Cristo to fetch him, he embarked the same evening and went with the skipper to Leghorn. Arrived at Leghorn, he sought out someone to whom he sold 4 of his smallest diamonds for 5,000 francs each. The man might have wondered how it came about that a sailor was in possession of such valuable jewels, but he asked no questions and made a profit of 1,000 francs on each one of them. The next day Dantes bought a small, fully equipped bark for one of his comrades, on condition that he should set out at once for Marseille, for news of Mercedes and old Dantes, and rejoin him at Monte Cristo. He accounted for his sudden wealth by saying that on his arrival at Leghorn he had found that a very rich uncle had died, leaving him sole heir to the whole of his fortune. Dante's superior education made the story plausible, and no one doubted his word. As the period of his engagement on board the Jeune Amélie had now expired, Dantes took leave of the captain, who tried in vain to retain him in his service, and of his comrades, giving each one of them a handsome present. He then set sail for Genoa. Here he bought a small yacht. It had been built for an Englishman for 40,000 francs. Dantes offered 60,000 on condition that it should be delivered to him at once. He ordered a secret cupboard containing 3 secret compartments to be made in the cabin at the head of his bunk. This was finished the next day, and 2 hours later a crowd of curious sightseers was speculating on the destination of a vessel which put out from Genoa with a crew of 1 man, who said he preferred to sail alone. Welcome in. Is that Sozan Alex? Welcome in. His destination, of course, was the Isle of Monte Cristo, where he arrived at the end of the 2nd day. His yacht was an excellent sailor and had done the distance in 38 hours. Instead of landing at the customary landing place, Dantes cast anchor in the little creek. The island was deserted. No one seemed to have been on it since he left. He made straight for his treasure and found everything just as he had left it. The next day he carried his enormous fortune to his yacht and locked it up in the 3 compartments of his secret cupboard. He had to wait 8 weary days before his comrade returned from Marseille, which time he spent in sailing his yacht round the island. When his comrade arrived, he had a sad reply to each of the 2 questions put to him. His father was dead, and Mercedes had disappeared. Edmund heard these tidings with apparent calm, though he expressed a desire to be left alone, and sprang on shore. 2 hours later, he reappeared and set sail for Marseille. He had quite expected to hear of his father's death, but what had become of Mercedes? A glance at himself in a mirror at Leghorn had reassured him that he ran no risk of being recognized. Besides, he had now at his disposal every means of distinguishing himself. One fine morning, therefore, he boldly entered the port of Marseille and stopped opposite the spot where, on that memorable, fatal evening, he had set out for the Chateau d'If. It was not without a tremor that he saw a gendarme accompanied by the quarantine officer come on board. But with the perfect self-command he had acquired, Dantès presented an English passport which he had bought at Leghorn. And this permit being more respected in France than any other, he was allowed to land without let or hindrance. That same evening he stepped forth on the Canebière, alone, unknown, as it were a stranger in a strange land. All right, kind of a longer one, not too bad, but we are between chapters. I guess chapter 19 was considerably longer than 20. Fair.
Hi.
Anyway. Hey, Fallen, welcome in. It's been a minute. I hope you're doing well. For those of you not familiar with Fallen Thespian, Fallen is a variety streamer and a facecam streamer, and he's part of a community theater troupe, I think is the word I would use, and is an actor, and is really, really lovely, and from Britain, and I 10 out of 10 recommend you check out his content. Ah, thank you, Valis. One step ahead of me. Hydrate before you dihydrate. All right. So, friendly reminder, between chapters, yes, Hawk, you got it. Between chapters, we hydrate, we caffeinate, we do whatever we need to relax and enjoy the story. I don't know about too kind, but maybe a little kind. All right. So we are on to chapter 21. The Pont du Gard Inn. All right, settle in, everyone. Let's continue the story. Such of my readers as have, like me, made a walking tour through the south of France may perchance have noticed midway between the town of Beaucaire, and the village of Bellegarde, a small roadside inn, in front of which hung, creaking and flapping in the wind, an iron shield bearing a grotesque representation of the Pont du Gard. The little inn, do I have a little I have an asterisk there. Where's my... Previously, there were notations at the bottom of the page, but they don't seem to have them. They have the number. I guess the printer may have excluded those in this variant. Hmm. The little inn had been occupied for the last 7 or 8 years by no other than Dante's old acquaintance, Gaspard Caderousse. He was standing, as was his wont, at his place of observation before the door, his eyes wandering listlessly from a small patch of grass, where some hens were scratching for food, to the deserted road leading from north to south, when suddenly he described the dim outline of a man on horseback approaching from Bellegarde at that easy amble which betokens the best of understanding between horse and rider. The rider was a priest robed in black and wearing a three-cornered hat in spite of the scorching sun, which was then at its zenith. Arrived at the door of the inn, he halted. It would have been difficult to say whether it was the horse that stopped the man or the man that stopped the horse. In any case, the man dismounted, and dragging the animal after him by the bridle, tied it to a dilapidated shutter. Caderousse advanced, all bows and smiles. "Are you not Monsieur Caderousse?" asked the priest in a strong Italian accent. "Yes, monsieur," replied the innkeeper. "That is my name, Gaspard Caderousse, at your service. Can I not offer you some refreshment, monsieur l'Abbé?" "Certainly. Give me a bottle of your best wine, and afterward, with your permission, we will resume our conversation." When mine host reappeared after a few minutes' absence, he found the abbess sitting on a stool with his elbows on the table. He placed a bottle of wine and glass before him. "Are we alone?" asked the abbe. "Oh, yes, all alone, or nearly so, for my wife doesn't count, as she is always ailing. First of all, I must convince myself that you are really he whom I seek. In the year 1814 or 15, did you know a sailor named Dantes?" "Dantes? I should think I did. Poor Edmund! Why, he was one of my best friends," exclaimed Caderousse. "What has become of poor Edmund, monsieur? Do you know him? Is he still living? Is he free? Is he happy?" "He died a prisoner, more wretched and more miserable than any prisoner lying in chains in the prison at Toulon. Sorry. In the prison at Toulon." The deep red of Caderousse's face gave way to a ghastly paleness. He turned aside, and the abbé saw him wipe away a tear with a corner of the handkerchief tied round his head. "Poor fellow," Caderousse murmured. "You seem to have been very fond of this boy." "I was indeed," answered Caderousse, "though I have it on my conscience that at one time I envied him his happiness. But I swear to you, monsieur l'Abbé, Monsieur l'Abbé, I swear it on my honor that since then I have deeply deplored his lot." There was a moment's silence, during which the abbé's fixed gaze did not cease to examine the agitated features of the innkeeper. "Did you know the poor lad?" continued Caderousse. "I was called to his bedside to administer to him the last consolation of his religion. What is so very strange about it all," the abbé continued, "is that on his deathbed Dante swore by the crucifix that he was entirely ignorant of the cause of his imprisonment. He besought me, therefore, to clear up the mystery of his misfortune, which he had never been able to explain himself, and, if his memory had been sullied, to remove the tarnish from his name." The abbé's eyes were fixed on Caderousse's countenance, and seemed to penetrate to his very soul. "A rich Englishman," continued the abbé, "his companion in misfortune for a time, but released at the second restoration, owned a diamond of very great value. On leaving the prison, he wished to give his companion a token of his gratitude for the kind and brotherly way he had nursed him through an illness, and gave him the diamond. When on his deathbed Dante said to me, I had 3 good friends and a sweetheart, and I am sure they have deeply regretted my misfortune. One of these good friends was named Caderousse. Caderousse is more tertiary. Like, Fernand wanted Mercedes, and Caspar wanted his position as captain, and de Villefort is the one who put him in prison, despite knowing he was not a Napoleonic sympathizer. So those 3 are bad. Caderousse is more like kind of gross. Like, just he hung out with them, but he didn't actually plot any evil and didn't, do any evil deeds. Yeah. He's the flunky. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. When on his deathbed, Dante said to me, I had 3 good friends and a sweetheart, and I'm sure they have deeply regretted my misfortune. You got it, Yuki. Don't forget to stretch. And a big stretch. Hi, beautiful. Hi, Yuki. I feel like I need a Yuki care package. Redeem. Only for Yuki. I'll have to figure out the logistics of making that happen. From one beautiful cat girl to another. I hope you're doing well. Happy Monday. Wait, Tuesday? Are you in Tuesday? I feel like you're in Tuesday. It is Tuesday. You are in the future. While I, despite the international dateline between us, am in the past. So weird. Anyway. When on his deathbed, Dante said to me, I had 3 good friends and a sweetheart, and I am sure they have deeply regretted my misfortune. One of these good friends was named Caderousse. Caderousse could not repress a shudder. Another one, the abbe went on without appearing to notice Caderousse's emotion, was named Danglars. Ah, that is the bad one. The third one, he said, also loved me, though he was my rival, and his name was Fernand. The name of my betrothed was... I do not remember the name of his betrothed. Mercedes, said Caderousse. Oh, yes, that was it, replied the abbe, with a repressed sigh. Mercedes it was. Go to Marseille, Dante said, and sell this diamond. The money obtained for it, divide into 5 parts, and give an equal share to each of these good friends, the only beings on earth who have loved me. Why into 5 parts? Exclaimed Caderousse. You only named 4 persons. Because I hear that the 5th person is dead. The 5th share was for Dante's father. Alas, it is only too true, said Caderousse, deeply moved by the contending passions that were aroused in him. The old man died less than a year after his son disappeared. What did he die of? I believe the doctors called his disease gastric enteritis. But those who knew him say that he died of grief, and I, who practically saw him die, say that he died of... Caderousse hesitated. Died of what? The priest asked anxiously. Why, of hunger. Of hunger? The abbé cried, jumping up. Do you say of hunger? Why, the vilest animals are not allowed to starve. The dogs wandering about the streets find a compassionate hand to throw them a piece of bread, and a man, a Christian, has died of hunger amidst men who also call themselves Christians. Is it possible? No, it cannot be. It is as I have said, replied Caderousse. But, continued the priest, was the unhappy old man so completely forsaken by everyone that he died such a death? It was not because of Mercedes or Monsieur Morel had forsaken him, replied Caderousse. The poor old man took a strong dislike to this same Fernand, whom Dantès named as one of his friends. He added with an ironical smile. Was he not a friend, then? Asked the abbé. Can a man be a friend to him whose wife he covets? Dantès was so large-hearted that he called them all his friends. Poor Edmond! Do you know in what way Fernand wronged Dantès? No one better than I. Will you not tell me? What good would it do? Then you would prefer me to give these men who, you say, are false and faithless friends a reward intended for faithful friendship. You are right, said Caderousse. Besides, what would poor Edmond's legacy be to them now? No more than a drop of water in the mighty ocean. How so? Have they become rich and mighty? Then you do not know their history. No, tell it to me. Caderousse appeared to reflect for an instant. No, he said, it would take too long. You may please yourself, my friend, said the abbé with an air of complete indifference. You may please yourself, my friend, said the abbé with a complete air of complete indifference. I respect your scruples and admire your sentiment. We will let the matter drop. I will sell the diamond. So saying, he took the diamond out of his pocket and let the light play on it right in front of Caderousse. Oh, what a magnificent diamond! Exclaimed the latter, in a voice almost hoarse with emotion. It must be worth at least 50,000 francs. Remember, it is your wish that I divide the money amongst all four of you, the abbé said calmly, replacing the diamond in the pocket of his cassock. Now, be kind enough to give me the addresses of Edmond's friends, so that I may carry out his last wishes. The perspiration stood out in big drops on Caderousse's forehead. He saw the abbé rise and go toward the door as if he wished to ascertain that his horse was all right. Afterward he returned and asked, Well, what have you decided to do? To tell you everything, was the innkeeper's reply. I really believe that it is the best thing you can do, replied the priest. Not because I am anxious to know what you wish to conceal from me, but simply because it will be much better if you can help me to distribute the legacy as the testator would have desired. Begin. I am all attention. Caderousse went to the door and closed it, and, by way of greater precaution, shot the bolt. The priest chose a seat in a corner where he could listen at his ease, and where he would have his back to the light, while the narrator would have had the light full on his face. There he sat, his head bent, his hands joined, or rather clenched, ready to listen with all attention. Caderousse took a stool and sat in front of him and began his story. Oh, man. The lackey. The lackey. Because, like, Caderousse, the worst thing that Caderousse did was while Dantès was away, when de Clermont, the captain of his ship, died, and he took over as vice captain, which is why Danglars hated him. Like, the crew loved him. He was a very good sailor. And the money keeper, the purser, Danglars hated him because he's young, he's good looking. I think at the time he was 17, and already like Mortel, the owner of the ship, wanted to make him captain. Morel, that's what it is. Morel wanted to make him captain after de Clermont died. He talked to his partner, they agreed. So everything was coming up roses for Dantès. Edmond, he was going to get married to Mercedes. He had the captaincy of a ship, which meant he had guaranteed income and good money as long as the ship was in good repair and made its way to destinations in timely means, moving, cargo from point A to point B. He had a really bright future, and Danglars was very jealous of this. And Danglars got together Fernand Caderousse, and they all plotted against him. Caderousse didn't do anything. Like, he didn't advise one way or the other, but he knew. He said nothing, so, like, guilty by association. But when Edmund was away at sea the first time, for 2 years, and when he came back to his dad, Caderousse collected on a debt that Dante's father could not pay. And so it left him with almost no money to be able to pay for things like food. So when he came back, his father was very skinny and very not healthy because he was just surviving off of scraps to make the money last as long as possible. So, and that obviously continued after he got sent to prison, which is super, super bad. But Caderousse didn't actively do anything bad, but he didn't help him either. So he's just kind of this ambiguously gray, terrible person. Because evil comes in multiple forms, and he is. He is a jerk. He's an asshole. But he didn't do anything wrong either. He didn't help, but he didn't do anything wrong. Like, the debt had to be paid. Could he have waited to collect on the debt? Absolutely. But in his mind, he didn't know if Edmund was ever going to come back. So he needed that money for himself. So he collected on what was owed. So it's gross. Anyway, we are between chapters, so you know what that means. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever you need to refresh yourselves, This is why I hunt my own food. Fair. Let's see. Oh, wow. Just all the stats. Is that broken? Oh, there we go. We're good. All right, so we are between chapters. I just drank some more water. Get a big stretch, because Yuki is so kind to remind me to stretch. It's really easy to get caught up in the story. I have found that this book is really hard to put down. It's the way it is written is enticing. I mean, it's a little... I do think somebody that doesn't have like a high school level of education might struggle, because there are a number of words in it that are, I would argue, sesquipedalian, which, if you're not familiar with that word, it means large words, lover of large words. A sesquipedalian individual is someone who uses or enjoys large words. Go figure. It's kind of like people that are, well, there's a word that I think is a phobia, that's like a fear of large words. It's an outrageously large word. I don't know. The English language is very amusing at all times. Mostly, I think it's amalgamation of all of the various influences, right? We've got Germanic, we've got Saxon, so, French and English. It's just kind of a, its own thing that evolved over time. Strong Romance language influences, of course. Spanish, Italian, French. Portuguese? Maybe. Not so much. Maybe. Anyway, we're on to chapter 22. Caderousse's story. Maybe he'll come clean to this priest that showed up at his door. For money, Caderousse will do a lot of things for money, so I wouldn't be surprised. It occurs to me I had turned off my captioning. Rip. Well, it's on now, if anyone needs it. Caderousse's story. It is a very sad story, monsieur, said Caderousse, shaking his head. I dare say you already know the beginning. Yes, Edmund told me everything up to the moment of his arrest. He himself knew nothing except what touched him personally, for he never again set eyes on any of the 5 people I mentioned just now, nor did he ever hear their names mentioned. Well, directly after Dante's arrest, in the middle of his betrothal feast, Monsieur Morel left to obtain further information. The news he brought us was very sad. The old father returned to the house alone, and with tears streaming from his eyes folded up his wedding clothes. He spent the whole night pacing up and down his room, and did not go to bed at all, for my room was beneath his, and I heard him walking about the whole night long. I must say, I did not sleep either. I was too upset at the old man's grief, and every step he took caused me as much pain as if he had actually trampled on me. The next day, Mercedes went to Marseille to implore Monsieur de Villefort's protection, but in vain. She paid the old man a visit at the same time. When she saw him so miserable and grief-stricken, she wanted to take him with her to her cottage to look after him, but the old man refused. No, said he, I will not leave the house. My poor son loves me more than anyone else, and if he is let out of prison, he will come to see me first of all. What would he say if I were not there to welcome him? I was at the window listening to all this, for I was very anxious that Mercedes should persuade the old man to go with her. The sound of his footsteps overheard gave me not a second's rest. Didn't you go to the old man yourself and try to console him? The priest asked. Pardon? Ah, monsieur, one can only console those who will let themselves be consoled, and he would not, was Caderousse's reply. He became more and more lonely with each succeeding day. Mercedes and Monsieur Morel often came to see him, but they always found his door shut, and though I knew he was at home, he never opened it to them. One day, contrary to custom, he received Mercedes, and when the poor girl, herself desperate and hopeless, tried to comfort him, he said, Believe me, my daughter, he is dead. Instead of our waiting for him, it is he who awaits us. I am very glad that I am the elder, as I shall therefore be the first to see him again. However good and kind-hearted one may be, you can quite understand that one soon ceases to visit those that depress one, and thus it came about that poor old Dantes was left entirely alone. Now, I only saw strangers go to his room from time to time, and these came out with suspicious-looking bundles. Little by little he was selling all he possessed to eke out his miserable existence. At length he had nothing left but his few clothes. During the next 3 days I heard the old man pacing the floor as usual, but on the 4th day there wasn't a sound to be heard. I ventured to go up to him. The door was locked, but I peeped through the keyhole and saw him so pale and haggard-looking that I felt sure he must be very ill. I sent word to Monsieur Morel, and myself ran for Mercedes. Neither of them wasted any time in coming. Monsieur Morel brought with him a doctor, who diagnosed gastric enteritis and put his patient on diet. Mercedes came again and saw such a change in the old man that, as before, she wanted to have him moved to her own cottage. Side note, if you're not already following Yuki Tsukumori, she is part of Gen 2 of Underrealm, like myself, and is my lovely compatriot from Japan. She is the fabulous Snow Leopard Baker, and I highly recommend you check her out. She's lovely. Monsieur Morel was also of the opinion that this would be best, and wanted to move him by force, but he protested so violently that they were afraid to do so. Mercedes remained at the bedside. Monsieur Morel went away, making a sign to Mercedes that he had left a purse on the mantel shelf. Nevertheless, taking advantage of the doctor's instructions, the old man would eat nothing. Finally, after 9 days' despair and wasting, the old man died. Cursing those who had caused all his misery, his last words to Mercedes were, "If you see my Edmund again, tell him I died blessing him." The abbe rose and twice paced round the room, pressing his trembling hand to his parched throat. "And you believe that he died of hunger, monsieur, pure starvation," said Caderousse. "I am as certain of it as that we too are Christians." "A sad, sad tragedy," said the priest, and his voice was hoarse with emotion. "All the more sad," said Caderousse, "because it was none of God's doing, but the work of those men." "Let me know about those men," said the abbe, "and remember, you have bound yourself to tell me everything. Who are the men who caused the son to die of despair and the father of hunger?" "Two men who were jealous of him, the one through love and the other through ambition. Their names are Fernand and Danglars." "In what way did they show this jealousy?" "They denounced Edmund as a Bonapartist agent." "Which of the two denounced him? Who was the real culprit?" "Both were guilty. The letter was written on the day before the betrothal feast. It was Danglars who wrote it with his left hand. It was Fernand who posted it." "And yet you did not protest against such infamy," said the abbe. "Then you are their accomplice." "They both made me drink so excessively, monsieur, that I was no longer responsible for my actions. I only saw through a mist. I said all I said all that a man is capable of saying when in such a state, but they both told me that they were only playing a harmless joke, which would carry no consequences with it." "But the next day you saw what consequences it had, yet you said nothing, though you were present when he was arrested." "Yes, monsieur, I was there, and I tried to speak. I wanted to say all I knew, but Danglars prevented me. I will own that I stood in fear of the political state of things at the time, and I let myself be overruled. I kept silence. It was cowardly, I know, but it was not criminal." "I understand. Just let things take their course. You just let things take their course." "Yeah, see? Jerk. Weak-willed jerk." "Yes, monsieur," was Caderousse's rejoinder, "and I regret it night and day. I often ask pardon of God for it, I assure you, especially as this action, the only one I have to reproach myself with during the whole of my lifetime, is no doubt the cause of my adversity. I am paying the penalty for one moment's selfishness." With these words, Caderousse bowed his head with all the signs of a true penitent. There followed a short silence. The abbé got up and paced the room in deep thought. At length he returned to his place and sat down, saying, "You have mentioned a Monsieur Morel 2 or 3 times. Who was he?" "He was the owner of the Pharaon." "What part did he play in this sad affair?" "The part of an honest courageous and affectionate man, monsieur. 20 times did he intercede for Dantes. When the emperor returned, he wrote, entreated, and threatened, with the result that during the second restoration he was persecuted as a Bonapartist. As I told you before, he came again and again to Dante's father to persuade him to live with him in his house. And, as I also mentioned the day before the old man's death, he left on the mantelshelf a purse which contained sufficient money to pay off his debts and to defray the expenses of the funeral. Thus, the poor old man was enabled to die as he had lived, without doing wrong to anyone. I have still got the purse. It is a red silk one. If Monsieur Morel is still alive, he must be enjoying God's blessing. He must be rich and happy. Caderousse smiled bitterly. Yes, as happy as I am, was the answer. He stands on the brink of poverty and, what is more, of dishonor. After 25 years' work, after having gained the most honored place in the business world of Marseille, Monsieur Morel is utterly ruined. He has lost 5 ships during the last 2 years, has had to bear the brunt of the bankruptcy of 3 large firms, and his only hope is now in the Pharaon, the very ship that poor Dantes commanded, which is expected from the Indies with a cargo of cochineal and indigo. If the ship goes down like the others, all is lost. For those of you not familiar with what cochineal and indigo are, indigo is a blue dye. It is a plant that is used to dye clothing. That one's pretty common. Most people know what that one is. However, cochineal is a small beetle that, when crushed, makes a red pigment. So they sent out and gathered up 2 very expensive dyes. Has the unfortunate man a wife and children? Yes, he has a wife who is behaving like a saint through all this trouble. He has a daughter who was to have married the man she loves, but his family will not allow him to marry the daughter of a bankrupt. And he has a son, a lieutenant in the army, but you may well understand that this only increases the wretched man's grief instead of alleviating it. If he were alone, he would blow out... Ooh. All right. I'm going to read out this part, but I do not condone this. If he were alone, he would blow out his brains, and there would be an end to it. It is terrible, murmured the priest. It is thus that God rewards virtue, monsieur. Just look at me. I have never done a wrong action apart from the one I related to you a moment ago. Yet I live in poverty, while Fernand and Danglars are rolling in wealth. Everything they have touched has turned into gold, whereas everything I have done has gone all wrong. Danglars was the more guilty of the two, the instigator, was he not? What has become of him? He left Marseille, and upon the recommendation of Monsieur Morel, who was unaware of his crime, he became cashier in a Spanish bank. During the war with Spain, he was employed in the commissariat of the French army and made a fortune. Then he speculated with his money and quadrupled his capital. He married his banker's daughter and was left a widower after a short time. Then he married a widow, the daughter of the chamberlain, who is in great favor at court. He became a millionaire and was made a baron. Thus he is now Baron Danglars, owns a large house in the Rue du Mont Blanc, has 10 horses in his stable, 6 footmen in his antechamber, and I don't know how many millions in his coffers. But how could Fernand, a poor fisherman, make a fortune? He had neither resources nor education. I must own it is beyond the comprehension of everyone. There must be some strange secret in his life of which we are all ignorant. It is all very mysterious. A few days before the Restoration, Fernand was called up for conscription. The Bourbons left him left him in peace at the Catalans. But when Napoleon returned, an extraordinary muster was decreed, and Fernand was compelled to join up. I also joined up, but as I was older and had just married, I was only sent to the coast. Fernand was enrolled in a fighting unit, reached the frontier, and took part in the Battle of Ligny, which was the last battle before his defeat at Waterloo. The night following the battle, he was on sentry duty outside the door of a general who was in secret communication with the enemy, and who intended going over to the English that very night. He suggested that Fernand should accompany him. To this Fernand agreed, and deserting his post, followed the general. This would have meant a court-martial for Fernand if Napoleon had remained on the throne, but to the Bourbons it only served him as a recommendation. He returned to France with the epaulettes of a sub-lieutenant, and as he still enjoyed the protection of the general, who stood in high favor, he was promoted captain during the Spanish War in 1823. That is to say, at the time when Danglars was first launching forth in speculation, Fernand was a Spaniard. So he was sent to Madrid to inquire into the feeling existing among his compatriots. While there he met Danglars, who became very friendly with him, promised his general support amongst the royalists of the capital and the provinces, obtained promises for himself, and on his side made pledges. He led his regiment along paths known only to himself in gorges guarded by royalists, and in short, rendered such services during that short campaign that after the fall of Trocadero, he was promoted colonel and received the cross of an officer of the Legion of Honor. Fate! Fate! Murmured the abbé. Yes, but that is not all. When the Spanish War was ended, Fernand's career was checked by the long period of peace, which seemed likely to prevail throughout Europe. Greece alone had risen against Turkey, and had just commenced her war of independence. All eyes were turned towards Athens, and it became the fashion to pity and support the Greeks. Fernand sought and obtained permission to serve in Greece, but his name was still retained on the army list. Some time later it was stated that the Count of Morcerf, which was the name he now bore, had entered the service of Ali Pasha, which is an independent ruler of the Balkans. Balkans are mountainous region, killed by his erstwhile allies, the Turks, in 1822. Interesting. The timelines are a little bit odd. But it's referenced here, so. Had entered the service of Ali Pasha. With the rank of instructor general, Ali Pasha was killed, as you know, but before he died he recompensed Fernand for his services by leaving him a considerable sum of money. Fernand returned to France, where his rank of lieutenant general was confirmed, and today he owns a magnificent house at Paris in the Rue du Helder, number 27. The abbé opened his mouth as though to speak, hesitated for a moment, then, with a great effort, said, "What about Mercedes? They tell me she has disappeared." "Disappeared?" said Caderousse. "Yes, as the sun disappears, only to rise with more splendor the next day." "Has she also made her fortune, then?" asked the abbé with an ironical smile. "Mercedes is at present one of the grandest ladies in Paris. At first she was utterly overcome by the blow which had robbed her of her Edmond. I have already told you how she importuned Villefort with entreaties, and have also touched upon her devoted care for Dante's father. In the midst of her despair she was assailed by another trouble, the departure of Fernand, of whose crime she was unaware, and whom she regarded as a brother. Mercedes was alone and uncared for. She spent 3 months weeping and sorrowing. No news of Edmund, and none of Fernand, with nothing to distract her but an old man dying of despair. One evening, after she had been sitting all day at the crossroads leading to Marseille and the Catalans, as was her wont, she returned home more depressed than ever. Neither her lover nor her friend had returned along either of these two roads, neither had she any news of them. Suddenly she seemed to recognize a step behind her, and turned round anxiously. The door opened, and Fernand entered in the uniform of a sub-lieutenant. It was only the half of what she was grieving for, but it was a portion of her past life restored to her. She seized Fernand's hands in an ecstasy of joy. This he took for love, whereas it was nothing more than joy at being no longer alone in the world, and at seeing a friend again after so many long hours of solitary sadness. Then, you must remember, she had never hated Fernand. She simply did not love him. Another one owned Mercedes' heart, and he was absent. He had disappeared. Perhaps he was dead. At this last thought, Mercedes always burst into tears and wrung her hands in anguish, but whereas she had always rejected the idea when suggested by someone else, the same thought now began to prey on her mind. And old Dantes incessantly said to her, "Our Edmund is dead, for if he were not, he would have come back to us." The old man died. Had he lived, in all probability Mercedes would never have become the wife of another. He would have been there to reproach her with her infidelity. Fernand realized that fact. As soon as he heard that the old man was dead, he returned. This time he was a lieutenant. The first time he returned, he had not spoken of love. The second, he reminded her that he loved her. Mercedes asked for 6 months in which to await and bewail Edmund. "Well, that made 18 months in all," said the abbé with a bitter smile. "What more could the most adored lover ask?" Then he murmured the words of the English poet, "Frailty, thy name is woman." Rude. 6 months later, continued Caderousse, the wedding took place in the church des Écoulés. "The very church in which she was to have married Edmund," murmured the abbé. "The bridegroom was changed, that was all." "So, Mercedes was married," continued Caderousse, "but although to all appearances she was calm, she was nevertheless nigh fainting, when she passed La Réserve, where, 18 months previously, she had celebrated her betrothal with him whom she still loved, which she would have realized herself had she dared to probe to the depths of her heart." "Did you see Mercedes again?" asked the priest. "Yes, during the Spanish War at Perpignan. Perpignan. I'm going to say Perpignan, maybe. Yes, during the Spanish War at Perpignan, where Fernand had left her, she was attending to the education of her son." The abbé started. "Her son, did you say?" "Yes," was Caderousse's reply, "little Albert's education." "But I am sure Edmund told me she was the daughter of a simple fisherman, and that, though she was beautiful, she was uneducated. Has she taken a course of instruction that she was able to teach her son?" "Oh!" exclaimed Caderousse. Did he know his sweetheart so little? If crowns were bestowed upon beauty and intelligence, Mercedes would now be a queen. Her fortune was growing, and she grew with it. She learnt drawing, music, everything. Personally, I think she did all this simply to distract her mind, to help her to forget. She crammed so much knowledge into her head to alleviate the weight in her heart. I must tell you everything as it is, continued Caderousse. Her fortune and honors have no doubt afforded her some consolation. She is rich. She is a countess, and yet— Caderousse hesitated. Yet what? Asked the abbe. Yet I am sure she is not happy. Do you know what has happened to Monsieur de Villefort, and what part he played in Edmond's misfortune? No. I only know that some time after he had him arrested, he married Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, and shortly afterwards left Marseille. No doubt Dame Fortune has smiled upon him too. No doubt, like Danglars, he is rich, and like Fernand covered with honors, while I alone, you understand, have remained poor, miserable, and forsaken by all. You are mistaken, my friend, said the abbe. There are times when God's justice tarries for a while, and it appears to us that we are forgotten by him. But the time always comes when we find it is not so, and here is the proof. With these words, the abbot took the diamond from his pocket and handed it to Caderousse. Here, my friend, he said, take this; it is yours. What, for me alone? Exclaimed Caderousse. Monsieur, do not jest with me. The diamond was to be divided amongst Edmond's friends. He had but one friend, therefore it cannot be divided. Take the diamond and sell it. It is worth 50,000 francs, a sum which will, I trust, suffice to relieve you of your poverty. Oh, monsieur, do not play with the happiness or despair of a man, said Caderousse, putting out one hand timidly, while with the other he wiped away the perspiration that gathered in big drops on his forehead. I know what happiness means, as I also know what despair means, and I should never play with either of these feelings. Take the diamond, but in exchange— Caderousse already had his hand on the diamond, but at these last words he hastily withdrew it. The abbé smiled. In exchange, continued he, give me the red silk purse Monsieur Morrel left on the mantel-shelf in old Dante's room. More and more astonished, Caderousse went to a large oak cupboard, opened it, and taking out a long purse of faded red silk on 2 copper rings, once gilt, he handed it to the priest. The abbé took it and gave the diamond in exchange. You are verily a man of God, monsieur, exclaimed Caderousse. No one knew Dantes gave you the diamond, and you could easily have kept it. The abbé rose and took his hat and gloves, unbarred the door, mounted his horse, and saying good-bye to Caderousse, who was most effusive in his farewells, started off by the road he had come.